Okay. Number 2. A rescue plane drops a package of emergency rations to typhoon victims of the mountain areas of Albay. The plane is traveling horizontally at 40.0 meters per second at a height of 1.00 times 10 to the power of 2 meters above the ground. Neglect air resistance. A. Where does the package strike the ground relative to the point at which it was released? B. What are the horizontal and vertical components of the velocity of the package just before it hits the ground? C. What is the angle of impact? So let's start by drawing our free body diagram. Nado kay airplane. So mag-drawing kog airplane. Tadam! Di ba? How ka no? The airplane daw na siya. And that airplane is traveling horizontally. And that velocity is 40. So velocity initial is 40.0 meters per second. And that is 1.00 times 10 to the power of 2 meters above the ground. So if this is the ground, then this is, this is 1.00 or 1.00 times 10 to the power of 2, that is 100. So 100 na lang ilagay ko dito ha. 100 meters. But take note how many significant figures yan? Tatlo. So these zeros here are significant. This is our dy. So anong case ito? Case 2. Tama? Horizontal man eh. Horizontal. Let us identify what are the required variables. First, where does the package strike the ground relative to the point at which it was released? So from the starting point hanggang kung saan aabot yung package. Example dito aabot yung package. So this is range, tama? Range or dx. Kasi yung package bag natin, of course, it will travel horizontally pa. Gumawat dere. Nadiri ang package. Letter A, where does the package strike the ground? So that is Rx or R or the range. Now for letter B, ano hinahanap natin sa letter B? What are the horizontal and vertical components of the velocity of the package just before it hits the ground? So nandito, ang X and Y component daw. So Vx, Vfx, and Vfy. Vfx and Vfy. Okay. Now for letter C, anong hinahanap natin sa letter C? What is the angle of impact? So let's start with R. Ano yung formula natin for R? Remember, R is dx. Ang equation natin for dx is R is equal to Vix times the time. Remember, this is case 2. Tama? Di ba sa discussion natin last time, alam natin na Vix is equal to Vi. Tama? Sa previous discussion natin yan. And ang Viy is equal to 0 meters per second. That is always the given kapag ka case 2, horizontal and then elevated. Okay? So Vix is equal to Vi. So ibig sabihin, given ito. Given si Vix. And that is 40 meters per second. So isulat natin dito. Is equal to 40.0 meters per second. Next si time. Do we have time? Walang time. So that means solve first for time. Remember sa ating previous discussion, time is equal to square root of, I hope na remember pa, 2 dy over g. So let us substitute all the given values. Sir, bakit ito yung ginamit natin na equation? Kasi nga, case 2 ito. So square root of 2 times, this should be negative, tama? Negative dapat yan. Lagyan natin ng negative because that is below. Kalimutan ko pala, no? That is below. So negative dapat. This is negative 100 meters. Take note, the zeros are significant. Divided by negative 9.81 meters per second squared. And that will give us time is 20.387 seconds, or how many significant figures? 3 significant figures. Time is 20.4 seconds. Ayan. Okay? But this is not yet our final answer because ang kailangan natin is the range. Kinuha lang natin yan ng time kasi nga unknown pa si time dito. So ngayon na meron na tayong time, so we can substitute time to this equation. So that means R is equal to, ano yung VI natin? That is 40.0 meters per second times the time, which is 20.4 seconds, and that will give us 816 meters. 3 significant figures. Yes, that is already 3. That has already 3 significant figures. So our final answer R is equal to 816 meters. Ayan. So that is our final answer for the range. So di ba? Sayang ba kayo? So let's proceed with letter B, and that is the vertical and horizontal components. Ang vertical component, so VFX, and ang VFY. VFY equals. Dali lang kayo ang VFX because remember, the velocity along the horizontal component is always what? Is always constant. So kung ano yung VIX at the very beginning, yun din yung VFX at the end. Tama? So ano yung VIX natin? 40. So this should also be 40.0 meters per second. This should also be 40.0 meters per second. So yan na yung VFX natin. Napakadali lang i-identify ng X component kasi nga it is always constant. Now how about VFY? Yan ang unknown. VFY is equal to GT plus VFY pala ito, no? Plus VIY. So we can substitute the given variables. Ito yung equation natin kanina. So let us substitute the given variables. G is what? G is negative 9.81 meters per second times time. Ano yung time? Time is 20.4. 20.4 seconds squared and I squared plus VIY. Saan ito VIY na to? VIY is 0 plus 0 meters per second. That will give us 200.124 meters per second. However, we need how many significant figures? Kailangan lang natin is 3 significant figures. So our VFY is 200 meters per second. It's either lagyan mo ng bar sa ang dalawang 0 or pwede din 200 dot meter per second or pwede din 2.00 times 10 to the power of 2 meters per second. Usually sa physics books, ito yung ginagamit nila. Itong 2.00 times 10 to the power of 2 meters per second. So it's either of the three, pareho lang naman yan. As long as alam mo na the zeros are significant. Isulat natin dito. VFY is therefore 200 meters per second. So yan na. So final answer na natin yan sa letter B. So i-read na natin. This is 40.0 meters. This is 200 meters per second. So ayan. O di ba? Dali kayo, no? But if the problem is asking for the final velocity, anong gagawin natin? Just take the Pythagorean theorem. So VF is equal to square root of 40.0 meters per second squared plus negative pala ito. Makalimot mo ko sa sign eh. Dapat negative dahil dapat negative So dapat kanipod negative and negative. Kalimot ko usahay sa sign ba? This should be negative 200 meters per second squared equals 204 meters per second. Yan. If gipangita ang final velocity. Pero wala man na gipangita sa problem. So yun ka problema. Next is the angle of impact. Theta is unknown. So same process lang gihapon katong ginahimo nato usually sa vectors. So ang gagamitin natin is either SOHCAHTOA or TOA. So for example, we are going to use the TOA. So tangent, tan of an angle is equal to, it's up to you kung y over x or x over y. Y over x ito VFY over VFX. VFY over VFX. So we will take the inverse of the tangent. So theta is equal to inverse tangent times VFY. VFY ang gagamitin natin. Asaan tong VFY? Negative 200 meters per second divided by our VFX is 40.0 meters per second. And that will give us, wag mo na i-take yung absolute value, 200 divided by 40.0. That is negative 5. Shift tan answer. And that will give us negative 78.69 and so on degrees. So theta, how many significant figures ang kailangan natin? Tatlong significant figures. So theta here is negative 78.7 degrees. Ano ang ibig sabihin ng negative 78.7 degrees? Ang ibig sabihin yan, it is below. Yan. So remember, this is our horizontal. So that means it is below the horizontal. Ayan, below. Clockwise. Diba? Clockwise is negative dapat. So that is why negative yung sagot natin dito. That's it. That's the final answer.